All right, welcome everybody. My name is Nick Hirschon. I'm a journalism professor at William Patterson University, and I'm the faculty advisor for our student chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. Last year, we were named the nation's outstanding campus chapter, and we were very proud of that designation. So we are very happy to be continuing this speaker series that we're doing now remotely. We used to do it on campus, but now doing it remotely with different guest speakers from all sorts of journalism backgrounds. And today, very excited to welcome live from California, Josh Lewin. Uh, Josh, his career has taken him from almost every major sports city in the country. He started in Baltimore in the mid 1990s, calling Orioles games on the radio, then the Chicago Cubs on WGN, the Detroit Tigers in the late 1990s and early 2000s on Fox Sports Detroit. You've done college basketball at Michigan State and SMU, been the voice of UCLA football, announcer for the Chargers before they moved from San Diego to Los Angeles. And probably in our market here in New Jersey, most of the students might know you best for calling New York Mets games for 6 seasons from 2012 to 2018 alongside Howie Rose on WOR. And of course, you're still the host of the Mets in the Morning podcast, which I am a loyal subscriber to. So thank you so much, Josh, for joining us today.
Pleasure, Nick. Thanks for looking me up.
Definitely. So to get us going, since again, we're thinking about the college student audience that we have here, you are addressing students who are looking for their first big break in broadcasting, perhaps a lot of students who are studying sports broadcasting, sports administration. And I understand that you got your first break when you were even younger than they were. When you were just 16, you began broadcasting the games of the Baltimore Orioles AAA affiliate, the Rochester Red Wings. So how did that come about? And are there any lessons there for the students in this group about how they could use that to, prompt their own careers?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's basically just chutzpah, more than anything else. I mean, Rochester's where I grew up, and they happen to have a AAA baseball team there that I followed, of course. And this is just always what I wanted to do, was be a baseball announcer. So I just kind of put it out there to look at, whatever you guys need me to do, I want in, be an intern, unpaid. And I used to go down there. I'd take the take the number 7 bus. There were only like 7 routes in all of Rochester, so the number 7 bus would get you down to Old Silver Stadium, which was in like a really rough part of town, but I didn't really care. And would just set up my little card table, and I had my stats, and I had like an old fashioned tape recorder because everything was old fashioned back then. It was the 1990s, 1980s, 1990s, and would just work on my tapes, try to get better. And but when I saw the team's executives, I would kind of badger them, like, look, I'd really love to, anything you need, I'm happy to do. So long story short, they let me come up into the press box a few times and just kind of help out. It wasn't anything glorious. It was like, filling up the popcorn containers and, whatever else. But that led to getting to know the announcers and led to doing, basically kind of like a modified, what I used to do for Howie, what Wayne Randazzo does for Howie now, just kind of like be that extra voice around, and the guy that had the full-time job was kind of on his way out. He was a little jaded, so it went from just reading the scores a couple times a game and, maybe hanging around and doing the post-game show to, what, he just wants to take an inning or two off. So here's some play-by-play. So I was really lucky. I'm 16 years old and getting a chance to do that. I got AAA tape, when I'm 16. But I look back on that, and it's kind of like you got to put yourself in the line of fire. You got to be there or nothing happens. And I was really lucky in a lot of things in my career. I mean, that was one of them. Had a couple of general managers with that team who were like, hey, this could actually kind of be like some good publicity. This 16-year-old kid doing games. So like that's, maybe we'll get our names in the paper doing that. And they embraced it. And then when I got my big break to do network television, it was just kind of same thing, right place, right time. Fox was just getting started. They were looking for a bunch of broadcasters in their 20s, and they found Joe Buck, and they found Tom Brenneman, and they found Kenny Albert, and they found Chip Carey. They put Chip in studio, which was the break I needed, because then they ran out of guys with famous sperm, famous last names. And so they just kind of decided, all right, let's take like one complete nobody, we'll just like make them into whatever. And I just happened to get that. And the only reason I got that again, it's just right place, right time kind of stuff. By then, I was doing pre and post game stuff, like you said, for the Orioles. This was about 1994, I guess. And the Orioles, unlike now, were really good then. I mean, it was a really good team. And the guy that ended up being in charge of hiring, who's actually now in charge of Yes Network, John Filippelli, but he was in charge of hiring for Fox back then. I found out later he'd be driving home to Greenwich, Connecticut, after a Yankees game, and he'd want to hear how the Orioles did because that was the big race then, Orioles and Yankees, and I was the pre and post game guy, having just been promoted from AAA. So he knew my voice, he knew my name, he knew my work, and when I just threw my name on the pile of 100 candidates to get this one last job to do play by play on Fox, he had heard me, he knew who I was, and otherwise there's no way that tape even gets listened to. So it's a lot of just trying to get to know people and hoping that a break happens to fall your way. There's really no magic formula. No, if you take this class and if you do this assignment, therefore you will get this job. I mean, it never works that way. And even Joe, Joe Buck obviously had the famous last name, but the he wasn't in a position. I mean, he went to Indiana, wasn't majoring in journalism or anything like that. It was just kind of there to have a college experience. And Dick Enberg, one of the greats of all time, was a zoology major at Central Michigan. So there's no true path at all. It just kind of it has to be something you really, really want to do and invest your time and energy into doing.
Sounds like though you are putting yourself in the right position, right? Just by being in the ballpark and being willing to do whatever they ask you to do, and then just being friendly with folks, put you in a good position to do that. So some lessons there for people. I should.
Yeah, I really believe. I mean, like 90% of everything is just showing up, and then it's a good attitude and some lucky breaks from there. But it's the whole, the New York Lottery used to have the thing, right, about you got to be in it to win it. And, that's such tripe, but it's so true. I mean, you literally can't win if you don't play. So it's great to work on your craft off to the side. And these days, I don't mean to sound like grandpa here, but, it is so easy now with just turn on Madden on your PlayStation and you can work on your craft. We had Pong, had just come out when I was a kid. I mean, but I worked, but that's what I had. I would like work on my play-by-play by putting Pong up there. Or we had one game a week. We had a Monday night football game. That was it. Or a Monday night baseball game. There wasn't Sirius XM to listen to. There wasn't cable to watch. So, when the time came, when a game actually came on TV, I would turn the sound down and practice. And, now you can go to your own local, junior college or your own local little league field, and you can set up a stream. You can do a Twitch stream. You can go on YouTube. I mean, you can get out there. You can put yourself out there. There's no excuse now. I mean, in the 80s and the 90s, you really needed to catch a big break because otherwise you're just doing it for an audience of one. You guys can do it for an audience of however many people you want now. And, the problem with that, you got to be ready for it, obviously, is now because everybody can do it, everybody's doing it. So, it's like going to a public swimming pool on a really hot day, right? Where it's like, 500 people in the pool. And it's like, well, that's not fun. I'm not getting my laps in at all. So there's a little push pull there. I mean, yes, anyone can do it now, but unfortunately everyone thinks they can do it. So how do you separate yourself out? What puts you over the top? And a lot of that is just some simple hard work, not just doing it to do it, but listening back, getting some feedback, tweaking it, just really, really working it. But also making those connections and then meeting people who someday might be able to give you that first paid gig.
Yeah, excellent. I should mention as I continue on, I do have some questions here for Josh, but there will be an opportunity for anyone here to ask some questions. So if you do have stuff, just get ready. You can click raise hand and write it in the chat and we can get to those. But just then to move on to when you were in college, like these folks are, when you were at Northwestern, you graduated in 1990, you're talking to this group of aspiring journalists today who want to cover sports. So yes, you've talked about they could go to a little league field or they could cover their team, at William Patterson. Are there any specific classes you would recommend that they take at this point? Certainly things about technical skills that maybe were not as relevant when you were going through school, but now have become really important? Is social media classes? Are there skills they should learn or activities that they should get involved in?
That's a great question, Nick. And it's funny, my answer has changed very recently on that one because, yes, I mean, the more clubs that are in your bag, the more attractive you're going to be to a potential boss. I mean, if you can do nine different skills, so they only have to hire one guy and you're the utility man. I mean, I've always been fascinated. I mean, I go back to like Tony Phillips and the Joe McEwings and guys like that who could play multiple positions, and those guys will always have a job in baseball. And I think it has become very similar to that in broadcasting. The thing I used to say, and I'm still married to it, is, and I'm not just saying this because you're the professor, but the journalism background I think is really important, and not for any other reason than it teaches you news judgment. It teaches you how to form opinions and do things on the fly. The best example I can give you, and it's why I got pushed into doing journalism instead of broadcasting for a major. So, quick backstory: my second cousin is a guy named Dennis Lewin, who used to produce Monday Night Football for a few years, like way back in the day with Howard Cosell and guys like that. And I didn't even meet him till I was like 11. I mean, he's like a really distant relative. But once I decided that this is what I wanted to do, he was obviously a guy whose opinion I really trusted. And the example that ended up being so great didn't actually exist until I was almost done with college. In the 1989 World Series, some of you might know, the A's and Giants were playing, and there was the massive earthquake. So Al Michaels was in the booth with Tim McCarver, and literally in the middle of their open, here's an earthquake, and like all of San Francisco is on fire, and it's just chaos. So all of a sudden, Al Michaels is a newsman. And, if he had just been regular, I went to Syracuse guy, I've got my Newhouse degree guy, and I know how to do a game on ESPN2, just like 500 other guys know how to do that job. I don't know that he's able to anchor the news coverage. I mean, he basically became Ted Koppel, I mean, or, whatever famous news guy. I don't even watch news anymore. So, he became a reporter like that. And it dawned on me like, okay, that's what separates the greats. I mean, Bob Costas and Al Michaels and those guys, I mean, in a pinch, they could do anything. And, it's not just here's the pitch or, here's an anecdote about this second baseman. So I really came to embrace that. It kind of like justified why I had chosen journalism. Like, yeah, I want to be able to do what Al Michaels just did if that ever comes up. So I think that's important. But your point about being able to market yourself and do social media, and I mean, I know now this is my 6th year at UCLA, and all of a sudden it's not just doing the play-by-play. They want a couple of podcasts out there, and they want me to be able to tweet and do Instagram effectively, and that's not something that I knew how to do until really recently. But yeah, if you guys can embrace that, that's totally a skill that you can always have.
Well, to that point, let's discuss your use of social media, because Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, even now have become critical ways for journalists to reach their audiences, promote brands. And I actually teach a class every spring named Reporting Through Social Media now, where some of the students who are in this group are going to be taking that class. And sometimes some journalists have kind of unusual, quirky approaches. We always look at different people and what they're tweeting out and how they try to relate to the audience. And I was preparing for our interview today, and I saw that last year when the pandemic began, sports were almost universally shut down, and you tweeted a video of you microwaving a taquito, and you were counting down the seconds and narrating the anticipation from your wife and your dog as the clock ticked out. So what's your philosophy on building this following and engaging audiences on social media?
So again, there's no one right answer. I mean, Costas not only is not on social media, but literally until last year, he still had like a flip phone. I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, like from 25 years ago. And if you want the kind like where if you wanted to text it, you gotta go A B C B, D E F E. I mean, those phones don't even exist anymore. So he does just fine, without any social media at all. There's other guys that embrace it and it's part of their brand, or whatever you want to call it. I think you just got to be you. If it's something that you think you want to do and it's in your wheelhouse, Sure. I mean, there's totally a way to connect with people that way. I think there's value to it. I mean, I try to, um, to stay engaged with the UCLA fan base by maybe, sending like a tweet a week, just to like kind of let them know I'm there and hey, we're all in this together. I really think, and this is, I mean, it's kind of out there, but I think we're very close, maybe like within a year or two, to if I'm a major league team, an NFL team, a university, I want not only a team broadcaster, I want a team podcaster, and I want a team, social media guy. I mean, not just a social media department like some, wizard behind the curtain, some 23-year-old who's sending tweets and just, because they know what goes well. But someone who can really engage and lead a discussion and be a Pied Piper. NFL teams are actually embracing that. I mean, the Patriots have 12 different podcasts. They've got two different, maybe three different now full-time podcasters. It's like a whole different department that didn't exist a few years ago. And I don't run that, but if I owned a team, I'd be like, all right, here's my TV guy, here's my radio guy, here's my podcast guy or girl, and here's my live stream host, or whatever. I think that there's so many different ways to grow and to find platforms now. So it's never been a better time if you're interested in sports journalism. There's just all these platforms now and ways to get in it that literally did not exist even 5-10 years ago. So if you can get good at those, great. If that's in your wheelhouse, terrific. But if you're just a more classically oriented person, where it's like I just want to do the play-by-play and shut the hell up and not be worried about that other stuff, I see plenty of guys who are doing fine with that approach too.
Yeah, excellent. And that's good opportunities for the folks who are joining us here today who may be thinking, well, journalism is dying, print is dying, and they hear that all the time. But there are opportunities. People still want information.
And Nick, I mean, and not to cut you off, but I mean, that's such a great point, because it's kind of the synthesis now. I mean, the written word is just being consumed in different ways. And I guess what I mean by that is, I mean, I'm looking at the podcast I'm doing now for the Mets. So like 30 years ago, I guess I would have been like a columnist, like you write all that stuff out. Here's what I'm thinking about the Mets today. Then it became blogs. So you could have been a blogger, and nobody was getting paid for that. But then MLB.com came along and said, all right, we're actually going to assign somebody to every major league team, Anthony DiComo for the Mets. We want you to churn out Mets content every day in written form. So, and that just kind of hung out for 10 or 12 years like that. Now we've hopped ahead one level to, I mean, I'm still writing, I'm writing just like I would if this was going to be published as only the written word. But now I'm just basically kind of reading off a script or an outline, and it's still the same principles you learn in a journalism class, how to organize your thoughts. I mean, that's really what it's all about. What's the news out there? How do I organize it? And what's a compelling way to get it across to my audience? So it used to be, right, like when I was in journalism school at Northwestern, they didn't even have a radio TV department for me. I mean, they had a separate radio and TV thing, but that's a whole separate major. There was no broadcast journalism major. It was just journalism. When I went off on my internship, I went to the Rockford Register-Star and wrote obituaries and covered house fires. I mean, that's what you were trained to do, was just be a writer. And I would complain. I'm like, I'm not interested in this for a living. Like, this will not, hop over from one track to the other. And then I slowly realized, what? I know I'm not interested in zoning board meetings. I get that. But if I can do this, if I can attend this for an hour, figure out what's interesting and relevant, come up with a good lead, a good hook, and express to the people who do care in Rockford, Illinois, why are we building a Taco Bell here? If I can do that, then I can certainly do what I'm passionate about, which is baseball or football or basketball. So, that's why sometimes and I'm not suggesting your class is ever boring, but if any class, is ever like, why am I doing this? Why would I ever need to? It's because you're getting your reps in. It's because you're learning how to include people in what they need to know, and you're trying to develop a system for where you can do it with good information, some good entertainment, and keep people coming back for more.
It's funny you mentioned the zoning board meeting because actually my students are submitting a meeting story tomorrow where they have to attend.
Sorry, guys. I know it sucks, but it'll make you better.
They could be very boring, but sometimes there's some excitement. You never know. So I'm going to ask one more question, then throw it open. I'll have some other things I can add in, but for now, I was reading a profile of you that was written in 2015 in the Morning Call, a newspaper that covers Allentown and Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. And at that time, you were working radio play-by-play for two teams, the Mets and the Chargers, as they were known then before moving to Los Angeles, the San Diego Chargers. And the NFL, MLB seasons don't overlap too much, except for during the playoffs. And of course, that year, the Mets went to the World Series in 2015. So the article describes you were taking these red-eye flights to get from a Mets game on a Saturday to a Chargers game 2 or 3 time zones away on a Sunday. And I think it's so important for these young journalists to be enthusiastic and dedicated. That's something that maybe you can't quite teach. You certainly showed that in being willing to cross over the time zones, do all the travel. So I wonder if you can talk about like maintaining the enthusiasm, and also you have a family. And so some students are maybe wondering like, how would I juggle, being in a relationship or having, kids and all that, while I'm also very committed to being an elite sports broadcaster.
Yeah, it's not easy, and I'm not going to suggest that I didn't fall off the wire. I mean, I'm remarried. I mean, I got divorced in 2010. I don't think it had that much to do with all the wacky travel, but you're right. I mean, basically, married my college sweetheart, and it sounded really cool to her at the time. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna live this life where you're always gone, and sometimes I'll be able to come with you, and we'll have it. And then you get to be 40, and she's like, I don't like this at all. Like, I mean, I got to be home with the kids. And I mean, I get it, I mean, things change. But when you find a support staff, and I've got it now, I mean, I'm remarried to somebody who also used to travel for a living and understands it. And, it's just a better fit. So kind of on that point, yeah, you've got to love it. You've got to love your work. You got to not mind the travel. Frankly, I was saying to you before we got started, Nick, I mean, now, with COVID protocols and just, TSA lines and the fact that people are asshats, I mean, travel sucks right now. I don't know if I would ever want to do that again. But I was young enough and enthusiastic enough that until I was like in my mid 40s, I really didn't mind. And, it's not like I was going to some job where it's like, okay, you're like on the Alaska pipeline, and you're going to be, working in the mud. I mean, I'm going from an NFL game to a Major League Baseball game and getting paid to be there. So it's like, sign me up. I don't care if, flight's at 4 a.m. I don't care. You work on the flight and you sleep when you're dead. I mean, that, and I was happy to do that stuff. And it's not like I'm anti that stuff right now, but, now my age begins with a 5, and I'm like, okay, I guess that's why in your 20s and 30s and even your 40s, you have that energy, so you do it then. So I would embrace that now, guys, for sure. I mean, while you are young and if you have the passion, don't be a diva and feeling like, oh, I got to get up early or whatever. I mean, and I don't think you'll think, I mean, if you love doing this, I don't think you'd ever think that anyway. And that's just that's where I always was. I mean, people, yeah, I think I remember the point of time that you're talking about. I thought it was cool. It's like the Chargers had a game in Baltimore and the Mets had World Series game 4 that same night. But it's like, okay, I mean, like I took 2 jobs, so I got to find a way to make it work. So I, hired out a little propeller plane and found a guy that knew how to fly it and like, set it up so that as soon as the game ended in Baltimore, I could get to this little airstrip and this guy would, fly me to New York. And so I did both games. And I'm sorry, it's the World Series game 5. That's right, because Lucas Duda threw the ball to the backstop and we ended up not going to Kansas City after all, which was fine because I was like spent at that point, but I was ready to do it. Like that day was going to be, it actually started, if I remember this right, it was Halloween night was game 4. That's the night the ball went through Daniel Murphy's legs or over his glove, and they lost game 4. So I went back to my apartment in New York, changed clothes, took the 2 a.m. or 2:30 a.m. train that really does exist down to Baltimore, got in at 6, just kind of hung out, got ready for the 1 o'clock kick, did the game, which we lost on a walk-off field goal, and raced to this airstrip and flew to LaGuardia and found a cab and got to, and we lost that one basically on a walk-off too. It was just like a horrible, but then was ready to go on to Kansas City from that game. So, it's like, wow, that whole day would have been, New York to Baltimore to New York to Kansas City. And anytime somebody was like, man, that's crazy, or why would you do that? It's like, do you understand? Like, I got to do a Chargers Ravens football game, like, had a really exciting ending. Got to do a World Series clinching. I mean, that's like the most fun I've ever had in my life. So it's never overwhelming if it's fun. And if this is whether it's sports broadcasting or just traditional journalism, whatever it is that really rocks your house. I don't think until you're in your 50s you're going to get to a point where you're like no mas and you want to tap out just because you're having too much fun.
Right, right. Well, and the students can even get excited now about some of the things they're covering, which, believe it or not, there are some students who get excited about going to the town board meeting or going to the Little League game.
Hey, good on you if you do. It's awesome.
Yeah, because then it's only gonna get better. Well, and I remember just as a college student myself getting that first byline, the first few times you appear in a different newspaper. I was a reporter for the New York Daily News for a while, and the first time that you get that stuff, it's exciting, invigorating, and gives you more of that energy.
I got a real quick, Nick, because that's such a great memory. So when I was in Rockford, and if you've ever been to Rockford, Illinois, I'm sorry. I mean, you're not missing much if you've never been. But this was. It's funny. So this was me. I mean, I have my choice. I mean, they called it teaching newspaper, TN, at Northwestern, and they sent you away for a semester somewhere. And my grades were okay enough. I could have put in for Miami, for Honolulu, for the Marin County Times in San Francisco. I wanted what was most commutable to my then girlfriend, and to be able to get back to watch and maybe broadcast Northwestern basketball. That's what was important to me. Like, I look back, I'm like, what the fuck was I doing? Could have gone to Honolulu for the winter. But I will always remember my first byline, or the first one that actually appeared like on the front page of the paper. It was like -9 out, and the headline was "Brr." And it was my byline, and I wrote about how fucking cold it was. But in Rockford, that was big news. That wow, it's like -9 out, and so the newspaper got dropped off back when there were newspapers. Outside my little apartment, like $250 a month little studio apartment on the third floor of some building in Rockford, and I heard the newspaper hit at like 4:30 in the morning. I got up. It was like Christmas, I got up, and there it was, my first byline under this like plunging thermometer graphic, and I'm in my 50s now, and I still remember that as one of the great things of all time. So yes, I mean, if you're into it, I mean, this is not work.
Yeah, it's very exciting. For the students who have ever been in my office, I have my first daily news byline in there, and some of my the first time I ever got a front page story and all that stuff is very exciting still years later. So I do have, again, some other questions, but I want to make sure I get all of you folks involved. So does anybody have a question? You can click the raise hand at the bottom. You can come into the chat and tell me you want to come on and ask your question.
Hi, my name's Evan. I guess my question is, you talked a lot about the challenges associated with the job, but what is your favorite thing about it?
I think, I mean, this is going to sound maybe like a little ego-y, I guess, but I think the thing that always attracted me to broadcasting is I always likened it to being Paul Revere on the horse, where it's like you get to tell the townspeople, here come the British, you better get a move on. And on radio especially, there's this, I don't know if it's like power, if that's the right word, but nothing happens until you say it does. People need to know what's going on. If you're a Mets fan, you totally have this connection with Howie that you need Howie to tell you, because you're not there, you can't see it. And I just think that's such a cool responsibility. And I think that's what I've always enjoyed most about it, is I always picture there's somebody that, they're working like the late shift at Midas Muffler or whatever, and they'd really like to be there, they can't, or they can't afford to, or they got a kid at home, or somebody's sick, or they're sick, but they're really into whether it's the Mets or UCLA or the Chargers or whatever, and to be that conduit. This sounds cheesy, but it's like this sacred responsibility. It's like their life might really suck, but this is like their 3 hours that they're just going to invest in something else entirely. And they're going to trust you to let them know what they're missing. And I just think that's such an awesome, cool responsibility. And, I think it also goes with what you know you're good at and what you're not good at. I mean, obviously, like, finding a cure for COVID, way more important than telling people how the Mets are doing. But I don't have any clue how to do anything in a lab. I mean, that's not my thing. So it's kind of like, all right, well, I like the spoken word and I like the written word. I like connecting with people and I like sports. So it's kind of, I was five, when I came up with this idea that this is what I wanted to do. But I guess your brain just kind of knows, like, this is what makes sense for me. And if we're all here on this Zoom, I think we all share that in common, that there must be something inside of us that really likes helping people understand something. And I think when you come from it from that point of view, where it's not what am I getting out of it, how famous am I getting, how many likes do I have or whatever, but how am I helping somebody who shares enthusiasm for the same thing that I'm enthusiastic about? How can I help them get what they need? I think that's what's really gratifying. And if you go at it from that standpoint, somewhere there's a Will Smith, the actor, he's got something like that online somewhere about that's how he approaches acting, where he's not in it for like, am I going to get an Oscar or whatever? I just want to try to help somebody feel something. That's how I get gratified. And I think that shows in his work. I mean, obviously he's a talented guy, but he wants to connect people. And if you watch any Will Smith movie or go back and watch Fresh Prince from like the 90s, same thing. He's trying to connect with a certain segment of the population, and it never feels like work. It always looks like fun. So if that's what you can embrace, I mean, I think, like I say, I think that's why you're on this call in the first place.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. It's funny because you say it's kind of cheesy, but that's what I always tell students, of the way that I used to view myself as a community news reporter, and thinking about my neighbors and the kind of news that they needed when they're working and can't attend this meeting. They have other things going on. Like you say, they're sick, they're elderly, whatever it is, they can't be there, and we're their eyes and ears. So it's great to hear you make that point too. Joe, it looked like you may have had your hand up before. I wanted to see, is there something you want to ask, Joe?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, how was it, like, since you said you had to travel a lot? Because, like, personally, I take that into consideration because I'm willing to travel wherever the job goes. Because that's my mindset. Because, like, if we really want it that bad, like, you got to take risk in life and sacrifices. So I really want to understand, like, how that worked, traveling and all that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it can be a little scary. I mean, you're going to go somewhere where you don't know the landscape potentially. I mean, I got so lucky because, I started doing AAA baseball in my own hometown. And most guys need to start in Billings, Montana, where they don't know anybody, and it doesn't pay. And you're just, you're learning the ropes in a strange city. And again, that, I look back to that whole Rockford experience, which I seldom ever think about until I get on calls like this. But it's so good for you just to get out of your comfort zone, and I think you realize pretty quickly, like, I can do this. I mean, I'm capable of much more than I thought I was, and you adapt really quickly. Even if you don't make like lifelong best friends really quickly, you at least meet people that can help you out a little bit, and you kind of find your tribe as you go along, and the logistics of the travel, like I say, I mean, these days are just so complicated. I mean, that really sucks. But on the other hand, again, there's ways to get places and do things now that didn't exist in the 80s and 90s. I mean, there wasn't Uber and there wasn't, I mean, the ride shares or anything. And there's all, if somebody says, hey, I got a job for you, but you need to be in Philadelphia at 5 a.m., I bet you're creative enough to figure out a way to get to Philly by 5 a.m. And it's just a matter of, kind of sucking it up and being like, all right, this is just one day out of my life. That was always my approach, I mean, or on a run. I remember one really cool run where I was doing this back when I was doing Texas Rangers and Fox, and it just started Chargers. But there was a run in August where, I'll see if I can get this right, or I think it was an exhibition game for the Chargers at Lambeau Field, and then the Rangers were playing the Friday. Were they? Yeah, something like this. I might be getting out of order, but the Rangers were at Old Yankee Stadium on the Friday. Then I had a Fox game at Wrigley on the Saturday, and the Rangers the next day were, was it at Fenway? Must have been at Fenway. So it was like four iconic venues in a row in 4 days. And the travel was insane. And I was getting no sleep. But, you know, when else are you going to be at those four stadiums in 4 days and get paid for it? You know, so it's like, you don't even think of, I mean, to your point, it's like, well, okay, whatever I got to do, you know, if I got to like, you know, store away on some truck to go, you know, I'll do it. So again, if you're enthusiastic about it, Joe, it'll work. You'll be fine.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
We have, I know Andrew had put a question in the chat and then he raised his hand. So Andrew?
Hey Josh, so now that you're doing UCLA, what are the differences for you between doing college games and professional games? What have you noticed are differences?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, so the thing I always try to keep in mind with college games is these are kids, you know. I mean, my kids are that age, and you know they're not getting paid for this. They're student athletes, so when they fuck up, and they will, you know, I think you're extra mindful not to bury them. You know, that's to me the one difference. The thing I love about college, and I always like this about college, and it's really what attracted me to do the UCLA thing, is I just love the whole color and pageantry and community thing. You know, I mean, just it's just so open. You know, everybody's like wearing the same shirt and everybody knows the same chants. And we've actually got bye week coming up here, right in between football and basketball. And my wife and I are going to Spain. And you know, I'm dragging her to a couple of these, you know, La Liga Spanish soccer games. And what's so attractive to me about, you know, I don't know that much about European soccer. But what I do know that I love is that sense of community, you know, and I'm way more interested in going to see Rayo Vallecano, which is this, you know, stadium that looks a lot like the neighborhood that the Mets are in. Like, you know, I'm looking at it on YouTube. I'm like, wow, it's like Spanish Flushing, you know, and it's like old stadium and all of that. And I mean, yeah, I'll go see Real Madrid too while I'm there because why not? But that doesn't attract me nearly as much because it's that I feel that, you know, there's that real bond with you know, a small community team like that. So that's what I love about college, and you get that I think when you're doing a team like the Mets. You know, there's more of an expectation that, hey, you know, these are the greatest athletes in the world. They're getting paid $300 million or whatever, or 341 million, like a particular shortstop. And if you know, if they're not pulling their weight, I think people expect you to say that. And it's not always the same in every market. I mean, I've always said about New York, and it's why I love New York, is that, you know, you can't bullshit a New Yorker. You know, you can't just pretend that things are going well. Whereas like in a Midwestern city or even out here in LA, it's a little more just kind of happy sunshine. And that just doesn't work in New York because the fans are too smart and they don't want to be bullshitted. So, you know, but that, to your question, it's a really good question. Yes, I mean, there is kind of a more of a positive, you know, like upbeat approach, I think, with college as opposed to the pros.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Andrew. And I know we have a few more questions. I just wanted to, because I know we're limited on time here. There's one quick thing I wanted to ask you before we get to some of the others, if we can. But I know it's very important to you, so I want to make time for it. In 2018, you had launched a mental health website named oktogether.com to help people suffering from anxiety and depression. And your homepage mentions that 18.4 million Americans deal with some form of these kinds of challenges. So I don't know if the students are aware that you had started this website, but for these young people joining us today, and we're at a stressful time of the semester, we're in midterms, and lots of October always seems to be when a lot of things are due. Of course, we're dealing with the pandemic. What would you like them to know about battling anxiety and depression?
Yeah, I mean, it runs in my family, and it's something that I've dealt with sporadically myself, and you know, really didn't figure out what was what until I was much later along in my life. But I think the thing that resonated with me that I just didn't really see out there at the time, and thankfully there's a lot more of it out there now, is it's just whatever you're going through, you're not the first one to have to deal with it. And you know, I always felt like, you know, whatever anxious state would kind of come and go, you know, I just felt like, well, no one would ever understand this. And it's just so not true. So all that I look to do, because I'm no expert in the field at all, but it just dawned on me that like just to have like a little compendium of like, well, here's some people that you've heard of that deal with something, and here's what they've come public with, and maybe it's only 1/100th of what they really deal with, but here it is. And I likened it to the movie Ted, it's the Seth MacFarlane movie where they talk about the Thunder Buddies, and it's easier if you're scared of something or about something, just to know that you got somebody who's going through what you're going through. So I just wanted to create like this Thunder Buddy community where it's like, all right, I'm going to kind of scroll around and find my particular angst. It's like, oh, I didn't know like Ryan Reynolds dealt with that too, or I didn't know that, this athlete dealt with that too. So I'm not looking to solve anything because I'm not qualified for that at all. But I just kind of wanted to put it out there that, there's a lot of people that don't have themselves figured out all the time, and there's no shame in that. And there's a community that exists for that. So thankfully, it seems like over the last several years, there's the destigmatization of anxiety and depression issues I mean, that's all really changing. So I'm happy to be a part of that. I'm not like some groundbreaker or anything, but it just seemed like a halfway decent thing to put out there.
Yeah, it's very important to put that in the conversation. Again, I know students may be feeling it and don't always know how to express it or deal with it. And so thank you. And I'll certainly share that link with everybody as we wrap up. I just want to make sure if we can quickly try to get to a few questions. I see that Ryan posted something in the chat. What was it like calling the Red Sox games with Joe Castiglione on WEEI? And what were you able to learn from someone with that much experience?
So it was great. I mean, Joe is just the gentleman's gentleman. I mean, obviously knows everything about the Red Sox and baseball historian and all that, but just a super nice guy. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned from Joe is just he treats everyone he meets so beautifully, and he's got friends everywhere because he's just the nicest man in the world. So he wasn't he doesn't have the great voice. He's not the classically trained broadcaster in many ways, but he just really cares and cares about people, and it was wonderful. I mean, I only did like 55 games for the Red Sox because they had a need that year, but to be around that community was really cool.
I know that Justin's had his hand up for a while. Justin, do you have a quick question you want to get in here?
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so how difficult was it to transition between baseball teams and baseball teams when it comes to announcing, since it was Rangers, Mets, then Red Sox?
Yeah, I've had like this. I've started calling it the Edwin Jackson career of broadcasting, where it's just like it seems like 12 teams. I think it's been 6, but yeah, that was never by design. I always thought you always want to be somewhere forever. But I learned real quick. I mean, John Miller, who I think is about the best radio guy there's ever been, he was there when I was in Baltimore, and the owner didn't like him and sent him packing. It's like, really? That can even happen to John Miller? So now he's been in San Francisco for whatever, 25, 30 years, and he's in the Hall of Fame. But yeah, I've kind of come to see it a little differently. I mean, when I left Baltimore to go to the Cubs, I mean, it was kind of an upgrade job. Left the Cubs to go to the Tigers because it just got sticky there. Harry Carey wanted his grandson in there, he didn't want me, and I'm a pleaser. I didn't want to get in the way of that, and so when the Tigers called, I left. Could have stayed in Detroit for a really long time, I think, but my wife wasn't happy there. My wife at the time, she's from Texas, and the Rangers job came open, and it's kind of like, all right, I think this is best for my family. So all of a sudden, you're in Texas. And then I go to the Mets, and then so it's never a straight line. It's never what you expect it's going to be. But I've come to really appreciate it instead of run from it, I guess, over the last few years, where it's like, wow. I mean, like you just said, I got to work with Joe Castiglione and got to work with a Red Sox team that was coming off a World Series. Didn't get to end my career in New York as a play-by-play guy, but I got to freaking work with Howie, and get to know. I've known Gary Cohen for forever, but got to know Keith and Ronnie so well, and become friends with them. So it's like you wouldn't trade that for anything. And got to raise my kids in Texas, which as it turns out, I would never want to live there full time, but there's a place to grow up. They grew up in a nice house and the whole thing because we could afford it because it's Texas. So, everything works out. And so, yeah, I've come to really embrace the fact that I've had a lot of different places to learn and grow.
Excellent. So I know we have to get you out of here, and we're so appreciative for all the time that you spend here today. Is there anything you'd like to say to this group again of aspiring journalists as we end the session?
Well, gosh, so much, but I'll try to keep it short. I mean, first of all, just, don't get frustrated. I think that's the biggest problem sometimes is you're doing everything right and you don't feel like you're going anywhere. And you just feel like you're just on some treadmill and it sucks. That's tough. And again, that's where you reach out to the community you've developed, other broadcasters or, a professor or whatever it is. And kind of trust the process, like they say. That's so hokey, but it really is true. It just know there's no timetable for it, and that whole thing about if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, because it never goes the way you think it's going to go. And I mean, look, I never thought I'd end up living in San Diego and not doing the Chargers, but I love where I live, love the UCLA thing. And as it turns out, the Mets have embraced the podcast universe now, so I get to go back with the Mets. I mean, so you'd never plan it that way. You'd never think that's how it would all work out, but you just kind of got to trust the universe sometimes. That just keep doing the right thing, keep being good to people, and your time will come. Might not be exactly what you thought, but it might lead you to something. You might meet your life partner. You might you never know why you're supposed to be somewhere. And so take every opportunity. Don't turn them down. Be open to things. Be kind to people, because that stuff always comes back. And again, just there's no one process, no one path. You just kind of got to trust that it's going to work out, and not get too frustrated when it doesn't happen tomorrow.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We
Thank
know
you.
how
This is awesome.
busy you are. Yeah. So thank
Yeah,
you.
no worries. And I saw it up. I don't have my chat open, but if let me give you guys my email, because if you want to reach out, I'm 50% good on getting back to people. I'm not great at it, because a lot of times I'll get an email comes in and it'll like go lower, and then I forget that it's there. So, but if anybody wants to reach out, it's Lewin, JLEWIN 47 at yahoo.com. So if I can be of help in any way.
jlewin47 at yahoo.com. Thank you very much. I'll put that in the chat for everybody.
Yep.
So yes, thank you again. We really appreciate all this
Easy.
time.
No, I wish you guys luck, and Nick, continued success to you. I'm sorry I got to jump. I got a UCLA call. I got to get on here, but pleasure, guys. Just keep up the good work and keep believing, like Ted Lasso says.
There you go. Thank you. Take
All
care.
right.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
For joining us
See ya.
today.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.